All right, as I mentioned a moment ago, this breakout is building trust to advance hate crime legislation and reporting. And our moderator is Derica Sutton with the FBI Uniform Crime Reporting. There are note cards and pens on your table. If you have questions for the panelists, this only happens in breakouts. If you have questions for the panelists, raise your hand with the note card. We'll collect them and get them up to Derica.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending our panel. My name is Derica Sutton. I am the hate crime program owner for the hate crime statistics data collection within the UCR program. I am located at EHGS, which is in Clarksburg, West Virginia. A little bit about my program. We provide information on criminal acts motivated by the offender's bias against race, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, disability, gender, or gender identity. Key note to this thing is that even though federal law requires the FBI to collect hate crime data from state, local, tribal, and college universities, the law does not require those agencies to submit hate crime data. So again, our information is voluntary. It's only mandatory for federal law enforcement to report hate crime data to the UCR program. So today with me, I have some amazing individuals. Some of them you may have heard earlier. There are a lot of issues when it comes to reporting hate crimes. And some of those issues are training issues, lack of resources, trust, and fear. And today we're going to touch on some of those. So what I'd like is I want each of the members to introduce themselves, and then when you're done, I'll give you the questions that I think we're going to bring together today to show the audience things that we're doing to move forward in combating hate.
Of course. Good evening. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here today. My name is Joselo Lucero. I'm original from Ecuador. I live in New York for over 30 years. But my story, my beginning is, let me see if I can have a few slices. Okay. Yes, perfect. Thank you. The purpose of my presentation, or the purpose what I'm doing is my brother. The picture you see here is my brother, and the other side is myself and my brother. This is in 1995 when we come to this country, and very early age. 14 years later, my brother's walking in the street in Pacho, New York in 2008, and he was attacked for a group of teenagers and surrendered, and one of them went from behind and stabbed him, and leaving in the street for 45 minutes bleeding to death. And that was on November 8, 2008. Few days after the first Afro-American president. At the time, we think that our lives is going to change, racially talking about this, and I don't know what to do. At the time, the Latino community, it was ignored because they are victims of hate crimes for many years. It was caused because the local politicians at the time, the county executive, Steve Levy, create this law and order speech against immigrants. The police department ignored these hate crimes, turned the other side, and never reporting hate crimes. When my brother was killed, it was only one hate crime reported. When I find out my brother was killed, it's because one detective come over to my house and they told me my brother was killed. Later on, I find out he was killed because he was Hispanic. It was 7 teenagers. The youngest, it was only 15 years old. That fear about losing my brother's life changed from me to anger. The anger, it was for justice, to bring justice for my brother, for my family, for my community. And I decided to fight for justice. I went to the church who my brother used to be going, and the church turned back on him. But I do what nobody expected to do. I speak to the public and I say, if you ever be a victim of any hate crime or any crime, if you have a report in hands, bring me to this day. We gather in one place and over 30 people show up reporting hate crimes. The district attorney at the time, he was surprised. There were many hate crimes against my community. That's the short version about my personal story. And I know I'm going to answer many questions later on, but this is one of the things. In my second picture, this is after the sentence, one of the teenagers. The person who killed my brother was sentenced to 25 years in jail. That day, this picture was taken from the New York Times, and my speech was, the hunting season was over, at least for now. That was 17 years ago. Now the hunting season started a different way when it comes to the law enforcement eyes, even myself. I can be targeted right now, maybe because I speak Spanish or because my accent right now. That's one of the things I can talk about. And the changes can go to the next one. My brother's case, my brother's murder, it was supposed to be one day story. But I show it wrong, because that one day story in 2008 bring me 17 years later. And this is one of the changes I make when they bring the Justice Department to investigate the Suffolk Police Department for misconduct against minorities, not only Latinos, but minorities in general. Underreporting hate crimes, but also stopping trafficking and reporting many crimes against minorities. There was documentaries, there was reports, there was the Southern Public Law Center. I even ended up working for the district attorney office as a crime victims advocate. I'm no longer working for the district attorney anymore because I believe there's a lot of things that's not changing yet. And I think, in my personal opinion, I cannot be involved in something like that when it's being the law enforcement's weaponizing against my community. And what I'm doing after this, so for the last 17 years, I go to schools and talking about my personal story, my personal tragedy with my brother was a victim of a hate crime. But what it leads to a hate crime it was 7 teenagers. And I want you to keep in mind that 7 teenagers, one of them 15 years old, they're involved in these crimes. So what I do, I use my personal story, go to the schools and talk to the kids and say, this is wrong what you do. Bullying and hate crimes, for me, is the same. And the consequences is the same. So this is my job. This is what I do for now. Thank you.
Kieran, if you wouldn't mind giving us a brief introduction of you, and then again, with the underreporting and everything that's going on, what exactly how do trust and fear come into reporting with you? And what is something you're doing to overcome or work around this?
Sure. No, thank you so much. Thank you, Derica. And it's wonderful to be here. This is actually my first time at the Eradicate Hate Conference. I've been wanting to come for the last 2 years. I was pregnant and then gave birth, and so my 20-month-old is at home. And a special thanks to my husband. My name is Kiran Kaur-Gill. I'm the Executive Director of SALDEF, the Sikh American Legal Defense and Education Fund. Our organization will be turning 30 years next year. It'll be our 30-year-old birthday. We actually started out in 1996 as SMART, Sikh Media and Resource Task Force, to combat misrepresentation of Sikhs in the media. For those that are not aware of Sikh Americans and the Sikh faith, we are a visible religious minority, and part of our articles of faith include a turban and beard for men, and we also have other articles of faith which we share and provide education and awareness of through SALDEF. Around 9/11, because of our articles of faith and because of a lack of awareness of of the broader American public, of understanding who Sikhs are, we saw an incredible backlash against our community. We saw a rising number of hate crimes, and SALDEF was actually the only national Sikh American organization. It was started off as a volunteer organization. We had one staffer, and that staffer was just overwhelmed with calls. People didn't know where to go. People didn't know what to do. We had community members that were getting threatened. We had community members that were getting spit on, harassed, assaulted. And then today, many of you may know, is the anniversary of the death of Balbir Singh Sodhi, who was working at his gas station on 9/15. He actually had just bought an American flag to post at his gas station, and he was shot by somebody who thought he was associated with Osama bin Laden, not understanding who he was. He was actually somebody who was extremely involved in the community, had extreme love and just compassion for everybody. I got to visit him and his family a couple years back in Arizona, and it really, for me, was a transformative and life-changing trip. So SALDEF is an organization. We do media policy education, civic engagement, and leadership development. And we continue, unfortunately, with our change in 2001 to SALDEF from SMART, adding the legal defense piece and adding the piece about victim support services because it was so needed in our community. We continue to do that today. And we continue to try to support our community through times of tragedy. I was at the 10th anniversary of the Oak Creek mass shooting, and I know Pradeep Kaleka spoke here earlier, and I know he's also in one of the breakout sessions. Was happy to be able to support the community in that way. I know it was a tremendous just shock to the community to see how somebody could target us in our place of worship. And that was very difficult, I think, for the Sikh American community around the country. I also was there after the FedEx shooting in Indianapolis, supporting the community there. And most recently, we had an assault much closer to home for me. A couple weeks back, I live in LA, in North Hollywood. A man was assaulted a couple blocks actually from where I lived, and actually on the same street where my husband works. This man, Harpal Singh, was assaulted, and he remains in a coma. He's been in a coma for about 3 weeks now. This particular incident for me, I've been working with the community for several years now, but it sums up so much of where we are in this moment and where we need to go in terms of fighting hate and advocating for our community. I shared with you, I think, Derek, in some of our previous conversations, some of the challenges that we've had in terms of our community reporting hate. We've had issues where there is fear. There's concern that nothing will happen, or maybe they will be victimized for reporting hate. There are language barriers. There's lack of cultural awareness by law enforcement, and that can create barriers. In the case of Harpal Singh, there was reporting, but it came after some prodding to say, hey, we need to report this assault. This man is hospitalized. And also, we should look to push for hate crime charges. Let's discover what evidence there is and see what the situation is. He was a couple doors down from a gurdwara, which is where he stayed, and there was a lot of concern about him being in the neighborhood, some of the comments that were received, some of the way that individuals are interacting with him. And so I think that there was certainly a push to report after this was discovered and after community organizations got involved. But we know when this assault happened, there was other people on the scene that were not native English speakers, and we also know that those people were not interviewed. So the evidence collected on that day was minimal, and I think that remains a challenge for pushing this case forward. When I went later to the police station to talk to the detective, I left a message for the detective. I spoke to somebody else at the police station. They did not know how to spell Sikh. I had to spell it out for them. And I think this is disappointing because in North Hollywood there is a Gurdwara and a fairly sizable Sikh population. So I think there was certainly an opportunity and remains an opportunity to build trust and for relationships to be developed. When the preliminary hearing happened, there was the prosecutor and the defendant. The DA talked about what happened and the assault on Harbal Singh, who is a 73-year-old man. One of the things that was brought up by the defendant was that Harbal Singh carried a kirpan, which is a religious sword. It's a small sword carried by Sikhs. It was not used in the attack, but they tried to paint Harbal Singh as a perpetrator, and I think that was deeply hurtful to the community. So again, I think there's a lot of opportunity for awareness and education. Initially, when this happened, somebody reported it and then left the scene. We found out later that this is likely because that person was undocumented. And I think for our communities and many immigrant communities right now, that trust in law enforcement is decreasing because of a conflation with ICE. Just this past weekend, I was in touch with many community members trying to advocate for a Sikh woman who was detained. She is also in her 70s. She's somebody's grandmother. No criminal history, and I think many times it's hard for a community to understand why these things are happening, and all law enforcement is sort of conflated as one. The third, I think, in this case is the understanding of legal definitions. A lot of times our community doesn't understand hate the way our legal system does. A lot of times when hate speech is directed at an individual, when certain things happen, trying to explain to a community member what a hate crime is and that crime aspect and how that relates to how it would therefore go through the legal system can be challenging. And then finally, I think in this case, and we'll see, for many others, that prosecution of hate and seeing the conviction and seeing communities get justice can be challenging. And I know that's something that we're working on. And obviously, the more we're able for the community members to feel like they get justice, the more likely they'll be able to, or the more likely they'll be willing to report hate crimes and report really and partner on what's happening. So I just have a couple quick, and I don't want to take up too much time, a couple quick solutions from my perspective. Before I lived in California, I lived in New Jersey. We had a program through SELDF called the Law Enforcement Partnership Program, where we trained law enforcement. I was actually lucky enough to work with the Attorney General's office to do statewide training on Sikh awareness and cultural sensitivity. We have seen a significant improvement with law enforcement in our community in that state. And I think that is something that I certainly would like to implement in my new home in LA. We'd like to bring people from different communities into law enforcement because that also can help. So if, for example, Sikhs are interested in applying, if individuals from other communities are interested, it helps law enforcement understand how to navigate those communities. Community organizations like ours can help with translations, can help navigate different cultural backgrounds, and I think that is certainly helpful. We can also help with community education. So SELDF has done a lot of work trying to inform our community where to report. We are liaisons if they need help reporting, if they need help navigating the system, if they need additional support with victim supports, getting legal help. All of those things, partnerships with organizations like ours can be really helpful, and I think because we have worked across the nation to build trust with our communities, and they understand what we do, and we work with our communities on a variety of different initiatives. Leveraging us can be extremely helpful and efficient. And then additionally, I would say setting realistic expectations of our legal system with regards to hate crimes, and really helping our community understand what justice could look like, pushing for justice, but also thinking through what potentially some community safety alternatives can be, and what justice can look like in a situation where maybe they have more control. Maybe it's education for the perpetrator, maybe it's conversation, maybe there's other things that we can offer that can allow individuals to find healing when justice may not look like what they want. For some, justice may not come, or it may not come in the way that they hope. And of course, organizations like ours, communities need to get these incidents and these assaults in front of the media, need to advocate, because we want to push for the investigation, full and thorough investigation. The family of Harpal Singh wants the truth of what happened. And that can be challenging, but that is the role of organizations like ours, of law enforcement, of FBI, of the DA, and we need to work together to ensure that happens. So apologies if I've taken more time than granted, but yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you, Karen. Liddy?
Great. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Pittsburgh. I'm Liddy Barlow. I serve as Executive Minister of Christian Associates of Southwest Pennsylvania. We're a regional ecumenical organization bringing together 29 regional church bodies, conferences, dioceses, presbyteries, and synods of Catholic, Orthodox, and Protestant churches in the 10 counties of Greater Pittsburgh. We also do lots of work building bridges between the church and our civic, community, and interfaith partners. I'm here because of one of those partnerships, a coalition called Stand for All Pittsburgh. It's Pittsburgh's new hate and bias action team, and our mission is to mobilize the community of southwestern Pennsylvania to prevent, identify, and address bias and hate incidents to create safety, inclusion, and belonging for all. Derica, you were asking us about fear.
Yes.
And there is a verse in the Christian New Testament in the first letter of John that says, "There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear." And so when I think about what it takes to reduce fear in our communities, fear of reporting, fear of becoming a victim of hate, fear of the stigma around being targeted by hate, of all the different varieties of fear that communities might feel in addressing hate crimes, I think the solution, as cheesy and ridiculous as this might sound, is perfect love. And for all of us, for allies across the community, to build systems that systematize that perfect love, so that we can exercise care for all people in our communities. So I'm here representing Stand for All Pittsburgh, but I am not at all the sole leader involved in Stand for All Pittsburgh. And while, as others have said, I am totally blinded by the lights on this stage, I know that there are lots of you out there, so you can see each other. If you're part of Stand for All, can you just like make a big fuss out there? Because I know there's a bunch of you in the room.
I see a hand over here.
Yeah, there's a few of us. There's a few of us. So if you are not from Pittsburgh and you don't know these people who were hopefully just flailing around like fools, let me tell you a little bit about them, because I think it's important to note the diversity of the people who have been part of this project so far. So we are leaders from lots of different community organizations. We're leaders from the immigrant community, faith leaders from many religious traditions, people who serve historically under-resourced neighborhoods, civic leaders, police officers, librarians, K-12 educators, university leaders, experts in mediation, all kinds of people, as well as just plain old people who are compelled by this mission. Pittsburgh is a city that has the spirit of a small town, so a lot of us knew each other before we started working with Stand for All Pittsburgh, but we've been building out this table relationally, building it out by asking who's not here yet, looking around and seeing the places that are not yet represented, and intentionally seeking out folks who can join us in this work. We're working primarily as a coalition of organizations, but we're also building opportunities for individuals to be part of this effort. So just to offer a tiny fragment of our history, we actually got started just over 2 years ago. In the summer of 2023, Patrice O'Neill, who's the shadowy figure in the front of my vision, convened a bunch of community leaders with the help of Daphne Felton Green and Pardeep Kaleka, who were also working with Not in Our Town at that point. Patrice had made a film called Repairing the World that told the story of the synagogue shooting that happened here in Pittsburgh in 2018, and really told the story of the community response, of the ways that the community was activated. So it was clear that Pittsburgh was a place that had the capacity to respond to an act of hate through a powerful grassroots community effort. And so she brought us together to learn more about hate crimes, to learn about this issue of underreporting, to learn some of the reasons why hate crimes are underreported, and to start to think together, how can we change that in our community? Now, people debate, is Pittsburgh East Coast, is it Midwest? Really, Pittsburgh is Appalachians, and Appalachians don't like outsiders. So it took us a while to take this idea that had come to us from a delightful California filmmaker and make it seem like it was really a Pittsburgh thing, something that we could wrap our heads around. And so it's taken months and months for us to coalesce together as a group, for us to feel like a team, feel like we have a sense of this thing that we're building, be able to name what our mission and purpose is, know how we're going to navigate some of the very tricky issues that can arise in this context, make sure we've got the right people in the room, make sure we are dealing with all the technical issues of a partnership, right? Your mission statement and your logo and your website and your one-pager. We've been really fortunate to have the HERE Foundation partner with us and provide administrative support for this process. Nothing can happen if no one is sending out the emails about when the Zoom meetings will be. And now it's been 2 years later and we're here. And it's incredible to see how this very nascent conversation has evolved into an organization that's starting to get its feet under it as a force for that community act of loving our neighbors, of bringing people into what we in my tradition call beloved community, of recognizing that people of every kind, every racial background, every national background, every sexual orientation, every religious identity, all the other identities that can drive us apart, everybody's welcome in Pittsburgh, and we celebrate that community diversity. Our work is around communications, spreading the word, making sure that people are aware of the dimensions of hate in our community and how it can be addressed. It's around community engagement, as in our forthcoming United Against Hate Week observance with a calendar full of activities sponsored by many different organizations. It looks like our reporting team, we're using the Trust 360 early warning, early response platform to create a way for people to report incidents of hate and bias, even if they don't quite rise to the legal definition of a hate crime, even if they don't necessarily want their information shared with law enforcement, so that we can provide a community response that is appropriate to each of these incidents as they arise. So I'm really proud collectively of us, of what we've been able to accomplish so far, and I'm really hoping that what we've done here in Pittsburgh can be helpful in other places too, to reduce fear and anxiety across all of these communities and respond together in love.
Thank you. Suzanne?
Thank you, Derica. I think it's an interesting question, how do we address fear? And I'll share from my perspective. Again, my name is Suzanne Bearcat. I know many of you probably were at the main session, but My brother and sisters-in-law were murdered in what's known as the Chapel Hill shooting, and our struggle was to actually get it called a hate crime. Fear comes from a place of you're fearing a bad outcome, presumably deportation, death. In my family's situation, my family members already died. And it was a struggle to just get the truth of what really happened. In my case, the white supremacist turned himself in, said he did it over parking, and in a 24-hour news cycle, the media ran with it, taking the word of a white man, when 3 brown children were executed in liberal town Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where my brother had film footage that confirmed premeditated murder and hate, where he has told the girls before that he doesn't like the way they look because they wear hijab. And I pleaded within less than 24 hours of their murders. I was on national television pleading, please federally investigate this as a hate crime. And here we are 10 years later, and you know what? This is presumably considered the most fatal Islamophobic attack in the history of this country, and we couldn't even get that labeled as a hate crime. In North Carolina, hate crimes apply to misdemeanors like graffiti, but not to felonies like murder. And what we were told as families who are lay people, I'm in medicine, I know nothing about law and policy, was, well, this is gonna get tried as a first-degree homicide, and if that fails, then it can get escalated federally to be considered as a hate crime. But if you're gonna get life for prison, just go with that. And as families, the pain of not even being able to get the narrative right of why our family members were brutally effing murdered, and you can't even label it what it was, that it was about hate, and our data is crap, right? And that's why, if we don't have, I'm an academic, and if we don't have data, you can't fix a problem you can't even have a full sense around. Now, is there fear? You also need to ask the question, why is there fear of these institutions? Historically, the communities I belong to there's institutional racism against them. They have historically been surveilled. I recently called the FBI hotline to report an act of hate and violence against me, and was receiving, let's just say that the person on the receiving end had me spell out what hijab was and what Islamophobia was. And in the midst of my trauma, I'm reaching to the person who's supposed to be defending me and protecting me and has no idea what I'm talking about. I mean, these are issues that go beyond the fear of the community members being able to report. These are systemic, institutionalized issues, and if we can't reform it at that level, then we're gonna continue not seeing reform or changes that actually hold people accountable. I will say that, a lot of my advocacy and journey has been around language, call things for what they were. This was not a parking dispute, this was a hate crime. And one moment of hope that I had was at the United We Stand Summit in the White House under the Biden administration, and it was many of these people here, and it was a true melting pot of our community and what the US is. And I recall seeing on the screen, labeling that the #1 cause and greater than 90% of domestic terrorist attacks in this country are committed by white supremacists. And that was a shift in language that we had not been seeing and still struggle to see now. But, the frustration that I had was, had roles been reversed and had there been a brown or person of color perpetrator who had murdered and executed 3 white kids in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, the entire world would have known about this, and we would have called it what it actually is, a terrorist attack, an ideologically motivated act of violence. But instead we got it called a parking dispute by a deranged white man. There's anger in that, and there's frustration. And that language like terrorism only applies if you come from a certain part of the world or you look a certain way, when actually ideologically motivated acts of violence by supremacists that occupy more than 90% of hate crimes in this country, they're lone wolves, and that's dangerous and it's harmful. And I think a lot of work needs to, even in our own institutions with the language that we use, is really key to moving that forward.
Thank you. Maya.
Good afternoon, and thank you to all of my colleagues for everything you do, and genuinely sorry for your loss. My name is Maya Berry. I'm the Executive Director of the Arab American Institute. We're an organization that exists specifically for the political engagement and civic empowerment of roughly 3.7 million Arab Americans. Our work on hate crime has been very specific to what you're hearing today, which is that before this really challenging period we find ourselves in as a country, some ways unprecedented, some ways not, we continue to have challenges as just human beings in our day-to-day existence, right? It's just a common state of humanity as it is. Adding to that the possibility of becoming a victim of a crime entirely because of who we are, how we pray, who we love. These are the kinds of things that shake at the core of the cohesion of a society, which is why you heard from my colleagues, and I quote, "The data is crap, but yet I'm going to fight like hell to make sure that the loss of my brother is included in it." And the reason for that is because it tells a story of human failure that must be addressed, but at the same time ought not to be amplified by our own government's failure to respond to it as a policy, whether it's on the local level, whether it's on the state level or on the federal level. So I just want to share I do have a series of slides. I want to, we've had conversations about the problems of the data, and thanks to the incredible work of my colleagues on the end there, representing an incredible team at the FBI who works diligently to produce the most accurate data that they can based on what is reported up to them. And they did it earlier this year.
Yes, we did.
Which is a really, it's a great thing. In fact, if you were not in the session this morning, the really important breaking news was that they will be using the updated NIBRS reporting system by giving us data monthly.
Yes.
That is an extraordinary development in our ability to better understand what is happening in real time. So tremendous gratitude for the work that's been happening there to make that happen. But if you look at the screen right now, one of the stories, well, first of all, very little coverage of the hate crime data that was released by the FBI in August. Very little. That is unfortunate because we've normalized some of this to the point where it doesn't even generate the kind of headlines that it ought to. But second of all, part of the narrative was that there was a decline. So if you look at that chart, it starts with at 2015, which is sort of the beginning of the 2016 presidential election, and it goes straight up. So not that I don't want us to be hopeful, because I really need hope. This suggests that there's now a potential drop that's moving in the right direction. Except the reality is that's actually not the case. What we're looking at there is that if we did the same exact data at the time, it would have been 11,862 compared to the fact that we have 12,592 now. So because of the improvement in hate crime data collection, for a moment of time, it can look like that. But the reality is, regrettably, we continue to see the kind of growth that we've been seeing in hate crime in our country. Next slide, I want to highlight here a couple of things. That first line on top, that's anti-Black hate crime. The second line that you see there is sexual orientation and gender identity. The third line is anti-Jewish. That spike that you see, straight up little blip, Arab Americans were part of the reason that the Hate Crime Statistics Act was passed in 1990. And when they put together all of those categories that we track, there was a code called Code 31, was anti-Arab hate. By the time, for reasons that remain unclear, by the time things moved forward, Code 31 was actually eliminated. It's the only anti-hate code that has ever been removed from hate crime data collection. That spike you see right there is anti-race, anti-ethnicity, other. That's the post 9/11 spike that you saw in anti-Arab hate crime, but it's not labeled that way. So like Suzanne telling us, my brother has to be correctly counted in the data so we better understand it. When we talk about some of this, part of it is understanding that government piece, there's an erasure that can take place. And it's important that we understand it in order to get to a place of better responding to it. If we can go to the next slide. I'm going to skip the next two slides because I don't want to take up our time on the issues of, thank you. It was mentioned this morning that we don't have, and as Derica herself mentioned today, we don't have mandatory hate crime reporting. So what that means is the FBI will report on what they receive, but there is no requirement to get to mandatory reporting. There has been a significant improvement with the transition to NIBRS, and additional agencies are reporting. We were able to improve the hate crime data collection with the passage of legislation called the Khalid Jabara Heather Heyer No Hate Act, which attempted to get closer to mandatory. There's current legislation now in the House of Representatives that does the same. It attempts to address the problem of underreporting. Until we are able to achieve that, which one would think is a pretty simple thing. We're talking about agencies that receive federal funds. So the idea of turning it into a requirement so that we can better understand the nature of hate and what's happening would seem to be sort of a simple thing. We're not there yet, but it's getting, I think, better with the transition to NIBRS. Having said that, I want us to just, the top 5 offenses, biases on the screen. So the first point is 2024, when we actually look at the data and not do an apples and oranges comparison, it is very likely we're not seeing a decline at all, but rather that the trajectory continues to be an increase. The intimidation piece is in all of these, pretty heavily among all communities. You can see sort of the anti-Black, anti-sexual orientation, gender identity, anti-Jewish, anti-white, and anti-Hispanic. I included the anti-Arab, even though the numbers, frankly, because of the fact that the category didn't exist at the time, the numbers continue to be dramatically less than they should be, and the problem of underreporting there with regards to fear is an extraordinary thing. There's a press release, if you want to talk about why communities don't report, there's a press release that the FBI issued back under the first Gulf War, where they put out a press release saying there's a current, they call it the backlash effect, there's a current spike in anti-Arab hate crimes. And in the same exact document, without any regard for how this lands, they said we are responding to those cases and at the same time conducting interviews with community members with the potential to address potential acts of terrorism. If law enforcement does not protect and serve equally, then you will not have communities and members of those communities see that law enforcement as a place to go to report hate crime. And as an institution where we've invested all of our efforts into improving the hate crime data collection and reporting because we don't think it's helpful to have anecdotal data from NGOs. There is one way to collect this data. We just need to work on making sure that a community that's been highly targeted by government surveillance programs, a community that's sometimes been marginalized because of perspectives that it might hold, a community that has this tension, and this is something I think that you hear from multiple communities, that has to be part of how we improve this. But the final point I want to make on the 24 data as we look at it is, as I said, intimidation across the board, but the current climate targeting the Latino community is one that I think we have to just take a moment and I'm so sorry for your loss in terms of your brother years ago. Aggravated assault, if you look at that pie chart, the amount of aggravated assaults, those are the most violent types of hate crimes, and you see that highest among Latino category. I've always said I don't make a correlation between speech and behavior. I just won't do that. But I think we really need to stop and understand the moment that we're in to get a sense of how we must improve our societal response, because they took a trauma in their lives and made it their life's work in some ways. Susan Bro, who's Heather Heyer's mom, always says, I'm a member of a club I don't want to be a part of. So the work that they've brought to this is a critical piece. You've self-selected to be in this room. That's a critical piece. The climate we're in now, though, demands that we do more to get our government to a place where our societal approach can actually address this, I hate to use the word pandemic, epidemic, it's like, it's inevitable. It is not inevitable, but we must address this increase that's happening.
Thank you. If you have any questions that you fill out, Alexa, we've got some. I think we all can agree that even though we have made great strides in trying to combat hate and build trust, thank you, we still have a lot of work to do. And you being here, Eradicate Hate, is one of the ways to do that. For the first timers here, welcome. We love for you to be here and to join what I consider a family. For those of you that are repeat like myself, thank you for continuing to do the work that you do. We have a lot to do, and when I've spoken to several like Maya before, and again, the data that we have, it can be better. We need that nationwide representation. And I think with all the work that you guys are doing to build that trust, to overcome the fear within the communities, for them to feel safe to come forward, to report the hate crimes. And then that gives us the better data for all of us to work with. So, all right, I gotta put my readers on for this, sorry. Okay. How do you suggest we build that in reporting systems when so many law enforcement systems are also involved in surveillance that affects and I think this says drills, and if I'm sorry, communities. For example, ICE targeting Latinos, CIA surveillance and entrapment of Muslim communities. And I think that is that question. Okay, was that clear enough?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I mean, my answer is, if you have a conflation, you can't. Like, that's my answer. If you have law enforcement that's surveilling, if you have law enforcement that's working closely with ICE to detain communities, like, it's impossible for community organizations like mine, and Maya, maybe you can share your experience if you have other tips or tricks. Like, it's very hard to, to build that trust. So I think I gave the example earlier of what I was working on this weekend, where a community member's grandmother was detained. It was a big community story. Right in LA, we actually had the son of a religious leader that was detained, and that was very difficult for the community. He was a legal resident. We got him out, but like, he was legal, so it was like trying to explain to the community and then say, okay, this is what law enforcement did, this is what ICE did, this is, it gets really challenging. And I was on the Faith-Based Security Advisory Council last year, a couple of years ago under Secretary Mayorkas, and we actually, one of the reports we put out was about building trust with DHS, and we specifically said in our recommendations that there needs to be a firewall. This needs to be something completely separate. It does not look like they're doing that, and I think that gets really challenging. We have been having internal discussions at SALDEF, because since '99 we've had a law enforcement partnership program, which has been controversial for the community. Like Maya was saying, that there's been surveillance, there's been other issues, and I think as we're thinking through now where we go with that. I think, maybe it's really just looking, state by state, locality by locality about how law enforcement is responding, looking at, obviously what's happening on a federal level, and see because it's our responsibility to ensure, yes, our communities are reporting, but it's a broader responsibility to ensure our community is safe. So I think that those are the tensions, and I think, it is it's definitely a challenging time.
One of the things, working for the district attorney office, I able to see a lot of things, and cannot disclosure anyway. But when I offer my partner working with for the district attorney, my goal was because people in my community know me, and they know what I went through, and I believe I'm going to be affected, and working with the district attorney as a bridge in between the community and the law enforcement. So it was a situation. The one individual he was a victim of one of the hate crime, and one of the detectives called me and asked me, we want to know what is the status of this person, what is the legal status. And I'm saying, you never ask. We're not supposed to be asking what is your status, especially if you're a victim. And I understand you have to get prepared, because the defense, if it go to a trial, this case, the defense we will use against the person. And so they asked me, and I'm bilingual. I show up there and talk to the victim, and I introduce myself. And that was the part they don't understand. What you have, you can help them. Showing up, talk to the person, talk to the victim, and say, this is who I am, this is what I went through. You can look anywhere, this is what I do, and I want to try to help you, but I'm being requested, I had to ask your status. And, and I explained to him why it was the reason. But the ADA, they don't know how to ask the question. They're afraid to ask the question, but they have to ask it. In that moment, I said, I build trust for you. I'm helping you, but they don't see the value. And I'm disappointed because, I can help more victims like this. And unfortunately, they're losing the trust. If they're losing in the past, they're losing now. Now it's worse because the community is afraid to report any type of crimes. And just to give you an example, when we're talking about fear, when my brother was killed in 2008, and I raised my voice and communicated with the people and said, this is what I want. So people were afraid because they can be victims. Who can be next to it? But the law at the time was supposed to be protect victims no matter what is your status, right? You can report hate crimes, you cannot report it, whatever, but you can report it. In that moment, you are protected. There was no ICE informants, anything like that. But now, I don't have the answer. The fear now, I don't have an answer for that because it's no protection. And I have to be honest with that. It's no protection for any victims of hate crimes at this moment. This is my personal opinion, and this is what I believe. What we can do, I don't know. I'm looking for that answer. Thank you.
I think one of the most important things to do, though, is to actually continue to acknowledge that point. The data, I didn't even tell you how many anti-Arab hate crimes occurred because it's not a number that matters to me because I know how dramatically underreported it is. But the point is that you cannot fix this problem until you understand that there is no trust for some communities. But I do think that one of the key points to be made here is to go hyper-local. There are places where local communities have established individual relationships and have worked to overcome those issues so that we can actually improve that situation.
Yeah, exactly. I would agree. I think that, ideally, our government is a great group project. Ideally, it actually reflects the will of the communities that it's part of. I think at the moment, we have to depend on community to be community in those local ways, and for us to fill the gaps where those gaps exist.
Every time I go to a school and I introduce myself and talk about what I went through, is trying to tell any kid that you don't want to be in my situation, or you don't want to and the perpetrators in situation. And that's the only way I believe I can contribute, because talking to adults, maybe I cannot change their minds, but if you're talking a young student, I believe I can change that. Because after my presentation, sometimes I got a feedback. Sometimes they send me an email, say, I listened to your presentation, and made me think what you're going through. And I'm making an impact, even one person. Thank you.
In closing, for anyone who would like more information about the numbers presented by Maya or myself this morning, said, hey, please come see. I have a booth sitting outside. It's the FBI hate crime reporting booth. I'll show you this. We can talk about the CD. That's where Maya gave her numbers. Just in closing, just take everything in here and listen to all your speakers, because their voices are a reminder of the hate-fueled attacks, challenging us not to forget, but also to move forward and to push for change. So again, thank you all for listening to us. Have a great rest of your day, and thank you all for coming to the summit.